Hello, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So it's time to start our session on affordable housing across continent. Today our captain is Mr. Charles Inga, which is the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Urban Development and Housing in Kenya. As you may know it, Kenya is opening now the way for innovative policy on addressing the issue of affordable housing. So the reason why we pick him is just to bring this perspective, but also being able to link continent on how best we can collaborate on the issue of affordable housing. Mr. Chinga, you have the floor from now. Back to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this session. As the program director has said, my name is Charles Hinga. I am the Principal Secretary in the State Department for Housing and Urban Development. I believe that this particular topic, and seeing the many people that have come here, is very topical in almost every country. We are all striving to find a solution. Some of them cut across. Some of the issues are the same, others are very unique to the specific jurisdiction. Back in the year 2017, in Kenya, the World Bank released a report on the status of housing in Kenya, which was titled Unaffordable and Unavailable. I believe that is what epitomizes most countries. It is housing is unaffordable and unavailable. And just to give you some very interesting statistics from Kenya, we have about 91% of all the people that live in Nairobi, they rent. About 65% of the urban population in the city of Nairobi live in an informal settlement. Our housing deficit is over 2 million and growing by the day. Now, the key issues that needs to be addressed are around 7, but I want to focus on 4 key ones. One is land. Land is a resource. Land in most jurisdictions, and allow me again to cite my country, land in Nairobi now has been, research has shown it is the most expensive in the entire continent. So how do you deliver affordable housing when you have got the most expensive land? When you look at the market studies, the average cost of land to the total cost of the development should be around 10%, maximum 15%. In Kenya, in most of our jurisdiction, that is between 40 and 60%. So if you do not address the issues around land, there is no way you can be able to tackle the issue of affordable housing. The other one is the cost of construction. Cost of construction is obscenely high, largely because we have old building codes, we have very punitive tax regimes. As most of you know, in most of your jurisdiction, VAT is a real cost, because in most places the cost of the unit is not VATable. So the cost that is associated with VAT is a direct cost. And worst still, VAT is a cash flow tax. You paid now and you sell the unit 3 years later. So it's a punitive tax. Number 3 is the processes and the sanctity of titling. We need to get investors to come in and provide this housing. If you do not have a document that can be relied on by financial institutions and by investors, how will you be able to attract the investment? And lastly is the financing. Now, I know most of you will say that financing is perhaps the biggest problem, but I think today we want to discuss, and we will see that financing is actually not the problem. My background, I'm a banker by profession, so I understand something a little bit about money. And I know that money follows good governance. Money loves certainty. But where you don't have proper governance structures and certainty, money is not going to follow. We need to find solution on 2 sides of the equation for housing, the demand side and the supply side. If you solve one and not the other, you will not solve the issue of housing. I do believe, therefore, that we are going to have a very engaging discussion this afternoon. I hope, given the many number that are here, we'll also get to hear from the floor and hear some of the innovative ideas that you have towards this challenge. The last point I want to say, and perhaps this is what we need to change the conversation. COVID exposed the underbelly of the urban challenges. We were caught flat-footed. Our sector, the real estate sector, suffered because when we were told to stay at home and wash our hands and not go to work, millions of people who make their living from those construction sites, their livelihoods were written off. But I also believe that this sector of ours is the key towards economic recovery. Why do I say that? I believe that if we stop looking at housing as four walls and a roof, but look at housing in terms of the long supply chain, think about it. How many doors are there in a house? How many hinges are on a door? How many sockets are there in a house? On an average, each house requires about 85 bags of cement. We need so many kilograms of nails. If we deconstruct the housing into various components, therein lies the jobs that we so badly need to build back better. And with those remarks, I'll therefore like now to welcome my panelists, and I'm going to start with Werner Schmidt. Sorry? You're going to do the opening? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. My apologies for that. In the panel this afternoon, we have got the Executive Director for UN Habitat, who's going to be joining us in a few minutes, Maimouna Maud Sharif. We have Her Excellency Colin Vixen Kelapile, the President of the Ecosoc, is here with us, also joining us later this afternoon. We have Teresa, who's the Vice President of European Investment Bank, and I believe she's here. Kindly will be joining us to make the opening remarks. And then in my panel, I have Werner Schmidt, Director, European Investment Bank. I have Audrey Guiro Naples. I apologize if I mispronounce your names. The Deputy Head of Urban Development Planning and Housing Division, French Development Agency. We have Papa Abdoulaye, who's the Global Lead, Urban Development Islamic Development Bank. Welcome. We have Dr. Kingsley Muwo, the CEO of Shelter Afrique. Welcome, Kingsley. We have another former CEO of Shelter Afrique, but now who is the president of Family Homes Funds Limited, Nigeria, Femi Adewale. Welcome, Femi. Last but not least, we have Omar Silla, who's the Director, Regional Office for Africa, UN Habitat. As you can see, this is a very powerful panel, and so I believe that we are going to have a very robust engagement. It is now my pleasure to invite Madam Teresa, who's the Vice President of European Investment Bank, to make some opening remarks. Welcome. Let's give her a round of applause.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants and organizers of the forum, good afternoon to all of you. It's my pleasure and privilege to address you today on behalf of the European Investment Bank and to share with you some comments, remarks, and our experiences related to the topic affordable housing across continents. Let me start with a blunt yet painfully true statement. As of today, many young adults continue to live with their parents not having their own place. What does it mean? It means that often it makes impossible to start families, have children, and live an independent life. Still, these people are better off than many of the young people who migrate to large cities and have to live in informal settlements as the costs of accommodation are simply too high. The fact is that young people have now to spend most of their income for the cost of living in big cities may mean that the future generation will be poorer than our own generation. How did it happen that we cannot cope with this global phenomenon of rising costs of housing in big cities? Somehow we managed in other sectors. We made education and medical services much more accessible globally. Technological advances made advanced consumer goods accessible to increasing number of people. And yet, somehow, the housing sector seemed to go to other direction. Attempts to stimulate this sector by using typical policy tools such as lowering taxes or providing subsidies, which I must say worked quite well elsewhere, but do not seem to bring the expected results in the housing sector. So something evidently went wrong, and we need to identify and address it. We need to start by understanding that urbanization brings economic value to societies, and this value is created from increased economic activity, creativity, trade, and greater scale of interaction between people. This value is already lifting millions of people out of poverty and brings them together. In Europe, cities were always leaders of progress and an attractive place to migrate for people to. As we can see, it is still the case. Often the initial reason that created the city like a market or an industrial center no longer exists, and the city built around it still present, offering much more than a place to live for traders or employees. However, what we have learned from the history of our European cities is that their populations can thrive only if the city can share with all the residents the benefits of its success. In other words, solidarity and inclusivity are necessary conditions for a city to succeed. So, coming back to our question of failing policies, how can we, the housing sector, foster solidarity and inclusivity? This issue is, so we have one issue. The home is, in fact, with two functions. The first one, the home has a utilitarian function as a safe place to live, and second function is investment function as a way to preserve family savings. Why is investment function so special in case of housing? Well, the issue is to the fact that there are not too many attractive places in a city to build a house. So therefore, with limited supply and economic growth, the value of houses go up, and this characteristic makes it a good place to store family savings. Of course, the downside of that is the investment earnings of one person or one family mean higher housing costs for another. Consequently, government aiming at providing mortgages, subsidies, or tax breaks to support vulnerable groups risks ending up in the vicious circle of ever-increasing costs of these interventions. Moreover, these demand-type interventions and limited supply lead to even quicker increase of housing costs. Is there a better way? Our European history is rich in major processes impacting entire populations. When it comes to housing, It followed big population movements, modernization processes, and migration. But national and local governments intervened along the way. There were major housing programs implemented with a view to ensure decent quality of life. They all meant to realize in practice the postulate of solidarity and inclusivity. Large housing programs were implemented in various forms. There were public and cooperative housing programs. There were even programs implemented by not-for-profit private entities. Well, all the programs had one thing in common, that the economic value created by urbanization was kept within the not-for-profit housing sector entities, creating conditions for their future growth while maintaining affordability. In fact, it is due to the capital base formed by this accumulated value staying in not-for-profit housing entities that we at the European Investment Bank are able to finance our housing programs nowadays with our very long-term loans offered at very attractive rates. The history teaches us that the cities must evolve to keep pace with societal and economic changes. Those cities who were once built around markets or industrial plants today may be centers of service industries. And Katowice is a great example of it, I must say. So let me just remind you that the future will have 70% of all of us living in cities. What they will look like depends on us. Better urban future, the headline of this World Urban Forum, calls our cities to be inclusive, sustainable, and green. This all begs the question to how the housing sector must evolve to deliver this promise. There is probably no one simple answer to this question, but if the experience of European housing can teach us something, then it is that the housing system must be diverse and balanced. Housing must be offered by public, private, and cooperative stakeholders. The public policies on housing must require the value is kept within the housing entities. Secondly, having sustainability and inclusivity in mind, the homes must be closer to essential services, enabling access to most important needs within 15 minutes walk or bus ride. The cities of the future must involve people more in decision-making. Public institutions must be better funded and take on more responsibility to offer good quality, sustainable and affordable housing to residents. We at the European Investment Bank, we have financed nearly 100 billion euros of urban investments during the last 5 years. And we will continue to do so. Now with our newly established EIB Global, our new branch, to be even closer to our partners in key markets. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm confident that with closer cooperation among international and local partners, we will create good quality of life in the cities of tomorrow. And I hope that today's discussion will pave the way for increased support to this important sector for our lives. I'd like to reassure you that European Investment Bank is ready to respond with financing and advice and looks forward to cooperating even closer with partners to make our urban future prosperous and inclusive to all. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very powerful opening remark. And just to touch on one or two things that we had this afternoon, 70% of all our people will be living in urban areas. The opening remarks are calling us to reimagine how will that future look like? And what I heard is that sitting in this auditorium lies the hopes and aspiration of how that future will look like. Without further ado, I'd like now to turn to the panelists. And I have a couple of questions. My first question is to Werner Schmid. And the question is, what strategy of multi-level governance should be put by public institutions to sustain and increase the investment in adequate and affordable housing to address the challenges posed by the market failure in the provision of adequate, safe, and affordable housing for low-income and vulnerable populations? Welcome.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the opening remarks of our Vice President. It seems that money is yet an issue, because, okay, well, Teresa Tjewinska and myself from the European Investment Bank, and we have AFD here, so we're happy to contribute. Now, what are the strategies to increase and sustain investment? As the opening remarks have specified, actually, the social and affordable housing sector is an important sector throughout the continents. And in fact, we have particular experience and information from the European, which I would like to bring into this discussion, but also increasingly outside the Union. Now, there are a couple of facts which are quite notable. As you mentioned, PS, housing is increasingly less affordable, and that's all over the place, all over the world, not only in Africa, but also we see it in large parts of Europe. The market failure in this respect is well known and understood also in the European Union, where most of our EIB housing projects are. We, the European Investment Bank, as the Bank of the European Union, we are particularly focused on urban development, which is roughly 1/4 of our annual financing. So over recent years, as Vice President Tjewinska has mentioned, some 100 billion euros were invested into the urban sector, and triggering some 300 billion of investment, because we only finance a share. Now, what we can see is commercial investors in housing, they can deliver volume, but what they cannot usually deliver is affordability. So this is something which has to be considered. What we see in Europe is that European housing systems, they both have the public and cooperative rental components, and they're usually very big. In a large Western European city, this represents between 25 to 70 of the total housing present in the city. Now, when we look at the strategies to make sure that we have sustained and increased investments in adequate and affordable housing, a few recommendations can be made. On the one hand, housing systems have to be, from the very beginning, oriented and designed to be financially sustainable. If it requires constant subsidies and subsidization, it will likely fail. But how can then affordability and financial sustainability coexist at the same time? And here, Permanent Secretary, I come to an important issue you raised, land. Now, in Europe, in many areas, we see that land will be provided to public or cooperative housing companies for free or at relatively low cost, which changes the equation quite significantly, because this typically saves a large part of the cost. Financial institutions such as the European Investment Bank are important to provide long-term capital for these projects. We need, for social and affordable housing operations, we need to have a long-term financial investor behind us. In addition, and that's the third recommendation, we see that the eligible persons who fall under social and affordable housing should be defined relatively broadly, so covering a large part of the population. This diversity then usually ensures a rent level which is high enough to ensure financial sustainability and that the rent can be adopted for lower incomes. Now, typically, cities are investing in housing, while central government is providing the legal and institutional framework, which is key to sustain and give the security to the financial institutions and to access long-term capital. Planning decisions have to be made in a way to, on the one hand, create diverse neighborhoods, which together with a broad eligibility definition, then also usually avoids segregation. At the same time, social services should play a key role in defining the housing offer for vulnerable people. So to recapitulate, in my opinion, to address this challenge, the affordability challenge in the social and affordable housing sector, we need a strong, financially sustainable public or cooperative housing institution, and we can also learn from the best European models as a standard. When we look at Poland, where we are today, Poland had a history of mainly public housing stock. At the end of the last century, it moved to nearly entirely private solutions. But to be honest, neither of these two solutions worked very well. Now, the country is developing a balanced approach, and we at the EIB are supporting these changes with our finance and advice. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. How can sustainability and affordability coexist? I think that is, if we can be able to crack that, that is the elephant in the room. Audrey, which European and larger Mediterranean housing experience will be applicable in rapidly urbanizing countries of Africa? Welcome.
Thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to be here with you today, and thank you for the UN Habitat for inviting us. I'd like to just highlight very quickly some key issues on the housing sector. You know it, but it's always a striking figure. The deficit of housing units in the world is around 330 million units. Especially in Africa, the speed of urban growth increases the need, and the formal sector does not manage to produce enough. So there is the importance of the need, and moreover, the lack of the production. Because Mrs. Minister of Cameroon is here today, I can say as an example that in Cameroon, formal supply covers only 10% of the needs. Second point, you know, it is also the development, the massive development of informal settlements, with the consequences we know in terms of social, spatial inequalities, and also in terms of vulnerability to climate change for the for the low-income households. So it poses a huge challenges, as Mr. Principal Secretary said, for city decision maker on how to meet massive needs in terms of housing construction, affordable housing construction, but also in terms of infrastructures and facilities to accommodate these new housing units. The COVID pandemic brought the issue of housing back to the top front and remind us how our housing as a key role in a context of crisis. Staying at home remembers us that, shows that how necessary it is to have a safe and healthy place to stay. In the French Agency for Development, we have a long-term experience with the housing sector, and over the past 10 years, we have committed 2 billion euros in this sector, part in foreign countries, part in French overseas territories. And for us, this sector is very important because it's a cornerstone for the achievement of many SDGs. And we are convinced that housing has an important role to play in a sustainable post-COVID recovery, as well as in a low-carbon transition of territories. We'll just begin to share with you what we see today as the main obstacles for cities in Africa. And I agree on everything what have been said in the introduction. For us, the first obstacle is the need, or the lack, if you prefer, of coordination between stakeholders. Because we know it, affordable housing supply depends on a complex ecosystem of stakeholders. You have national and local authorities, private and public developers, sometimes land operators, financial sector, and each of them have different interests and objectives, and they are difficult to coordinate. So for us, this coordination requires a strong involvement of the public sector and of the public entities to provide robust framework. And in many cases, affordable housing is a priority for national governments, but with limited ability to coordinate. For instance, most of the housing programs are defined at a national level without including the local level that is in charge of planification. So this is a very tricky issue, but this is for us why it is key to support multi-level dialogue as well as urban planification at the local level. So this was the first obstacle, this lack of coordination. A second obstacle is about, you said it and you said it as well, provision of land, of course, but not any land, because land mobilization is often the main obstacle. Either it is well located and its cost is high, either it is far from city centers and jobs, or located in area vulnerable to natural disasters. The provision of well-located land to housing operators at an affordable price is complex, but it can be tackled in some cases by integrated land policies and strategies at a wider scale. And you mentioned the example we have in Europe with national or public land operators which are able to negotiate land prices for strategic operations. Third obstacle for us comes from the maturity also of the construction sector and the size of the operators. Supply of affordable housing depends on a complex value chain. Developers, construction company, land operators, architects, building material provider, and some of those stakeholders are often too small to provide housing at scale. It is hard to build quickly and massively affordable and sustainable housing units. But national programs giving visibility to the private sector in terms of public investment and financing can be a key to help construction sector to structure and develop. We managed to do that in France with a large public planification during the 60s. It has not been a complete success in terms of urban development or sustainability, but it has been decisive to structure the construction sector and make it able to provide massively housing units. And the fourth obstacle may be the lack of strong financial schemes. First, I think it is important to say that producing affordable housing in order to house low-income people requires public subsidies. The question is how much and in what way. In some countries, we see full subsidized program. It can be efficient to deliver quickly very inexpensive housing units, but we know that it is not sustainable in terms of public investment, and it is not enough regarding the importance of the needs. So it is important to seek a leverage effect between subsidies and debt. And in terms of debt, housing sector requires both soft rate loan and long-term loans. That is not, and if you want to develop also affordable rental housing, as you mentioned, it is necessary to have patient investors who look for long-term investment. So I will just stop here for the obstacle, and if I may, I will say a word on our new initiative to support public housing policies. In order to make more in this sector and to support decision makers to unlock the production, AFD has launched in 2021 a dedicated facility which is named the Sustainable Housing Initiative. The objective of the SHI are to provide public decision makers in charge of housing expertise to establish target diagnostic and to strengthen the policies. Another objective is to define the operational lever for action in order to develop work programs that will unlock the capacity for diversified housing production. To be concrete, the Sustainable Housing Initiative is a worldwide fund to mobilize and finance expertise, technical assistance and capacity building for public decision makers and housing providers. In the first phase, we will be able to support around 8 countries, and we have started discussions with 4 in Africa, including Kenya. So we have a range of financial tools to support housing policies, but we have the feeling that what is very key is first to strengthen the political framework to unlock the access to finance.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Let's give a round of applause. As you've heard, Kenya is one of the 8 that are benefiting, so I couldn't cut her short, lest they cut the support to Kenya on a lighter note. I think your message is very clear, and I think the main takeaway here is just the lack of coordination by the various actors, and that is public. And when you look at public, you have both at national, you have at subnational, you have got key stakeholders, including financiers, landowners. If you do not, this is one sector you cannot afford to have a silo mentality. You can be very good at financing, but if you have got poor public policies, you will not be able to tackle this monster. I think you acknowledge the presence of our minister from Cameroon. Welcome this afternoon. She's the president of our AGM Bureau of Shelter Africa. So she's here not just as a minister of Cameroon, but also the president of the AGM Bureau. Papa Abdoulaye, how can governments balance the interdependency of public and private roles in housing and infrastructure provision in Africa? What role can development financial institutions play in this regard?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to UN Habitat as well for inviting us. First of all, being here in Katowice, I would like quickly to introduce the Islamic Development Bank, which is a multilateral development bank based in Jeddah, and which is covering 57 member countries. We have 23 member countries in Sub-Saharan Africa. We have 24 member countries in the Middle East and North Africa, and 10 other countries in Asia. Now, the newest countries that just joined the bank are Guyana and Suriname in North Latin America. Now, to address the issue, what I would like to say first is that there are 2 issues we need really to point out. First is the financing, but also the role of government. For instance, when my colleague panelists talk about the land, I think it comes back to the role of government. The role of government is key when we talk about housing. The Vice President of AIB mentioned about solidarity and inclusivity. Who can really promote solidarity, inclusivity at the highest level, if not the government? So it's essential that there is a political will right at the onset, that the government is willing to promote social housing. The government is really willing to promote access to land, to create all the environment conducive for really the lowest population, the vulnerable communities, to have access to land. So I think it is important that we define the role of the government and we push them to have this releases, this willingness to support, to promote social housing. I would just point out that, for instance, in Europe, if you take the UK, there was council housing, and there are still council houses being promoted, and this is really for low-income people, and that was promoted by Mrs. Thatcher while she was Prime Minister. So that's very important. In France, in the other countries also, you have the HLM, which are also very low renting. So the role of government, I think, is very much important to promote this issue. And now, in terms of the environment, I think it's important that also, if you want to bring the private sector, we talk always about the PPP, but for the private sector to be able to join in, there are some really prerequisites. If you look at Sub-Saharan Africa, there are very few countries where we have a PPP law. But to bring the private sector, you need really to have this, at least a PPP law, which has been adopted by the parliament, which is effective, and which can really de-risk investment from the private sector. I think this is really important. The financing also, the government can reach out to MDBs like ourselves to promote for housing. But it's not sustainable for any government to try to scale up, thousands and thousands of houses. That's very difficult. That's why it's important to bring the private sector or corporate financing also to ensure that they will really promote large-scale houses. But there is here a caveat here, because, again, the role of the government, when you bring the private sector without ensuring and following and controlling what they are doing, maybe they will go more for the affordable housing. And affordable housing can be really a very vague word, because affordable can be affordable for some people, but not for everyone. And in some countries, affordable housing is really, you're looking at the really at the top 20, what we call the top 20, because you have the B40, the M40, and the top 20. So again, the role of the government to ensure that those vulnerable people really can reach out, can be part of it. Now, our role as financiers, as MDBs, is really an advisory services. We can support government to ensure that the model, the business model they are putting in place for promoting housing is the right one. We can support them, we can provide the technical assistance in terms of basically ensuring that this type of scheme for promoting housing also is the right one. We have several schemes. If you allow me just to mention one, the recent one we have done in Benin, where the government wanted to promote few houses. In the financing, the model we have set up, there is a project implementation unit or project implementation unit, which will have the role basically for the commercialization, to reach out for the people that will need to do the housing, but also to ensure that these people will go and register with commercial banks so that they can get a mortgage, because the mortgage is an issue. And also these people will have an insurance so that in case they cannot pay or there is a default in the payment, the bank will not be will not suffer for that. So these are guarantees that can be put in place. At the same time, this project implementation unit is also reaching out to some technical or construction industries that can help them to promote the latest technology in terms of building green houses, taking into account climate change, energy efficiency, and so on and so forth, and making those houses really sustainable and resilient. So I think key things, first of all, the financing is very important, but the role of the government also is very important to promote the overall conducive environment to promote social housing for the vulnerable and more poor people. Thank you.
Let's give him a round of applause. I once heard that on this particular issue of PPPs, and I'll come back to you on that. That where PPPs in Africa, where they've succeeded is where there is no law. I understand that we maybe went and adopted laws that are not fit for purpose for us. And so the laws end up being a hindrance. But I think that is, your message is very clear about the role of government. We've introduced in this conversation the issue of de-risking and also the technical support. And I think all of us do appreciate the importance of this technical support. Kingsley, the MD for Shelter Afrique, and Femi, I'm going to ask you the same question. One is, in your experience, starting with you, Kingsley, what kind of housing delivery mechanisms are financially viable and sustainable in the long term to meet the housing needs of the lowest income groups in the context of Africa growing economies? And taking the cue from Abdullahi on the issue of the 20%, because affordability is relative. Over to you, Kingsley, and then to Femi.
Thank you, moderator. And I wish to acknowledge here that I have the president of the Bureau, Shelter Afrique, Madame Cortez, and also the moderator is actually a board member of Shelter Afrique. So it's actually my boss. So in a nutshell, Shelter Afrique is a Pan-African development financial institution set up to finance affordable housing in Africa. So let's start from there so that we know what are the effective delivery mechanisms to deliver lowest cost for the lowest cost house. So what we did in Shelter Africa was to find out why are we not being effective in delivering the houses required. So we defined what is affordability. We have 44 countries as our members, and the 2 DFIs as our institutional members, Africa Development Bank and Africa Re. So we put up a unit in 2020, which we call Partnership, Policy and Research. So this unit, working with the Center for Affordable Housing from South Africa, defined a range of what constitutes for an affordable house in each of the countries, because that's very important. You need to know what you're delivering. So this unit has actually defined what an affordable house is, and I'll be giving case studies for select countries. So we said for us to be effective to deliver to the lowest income groups, let's define an affordable house, because when you measure something, you can manage it rather than just funding for the sake of it. So we have defined what an affordable house is in each country. For example, Kenya, where our headquarters is, the definition of an affordable house in Kenya, we have put a figure to it. Let me use dollars for ease understanding. The currency there is shilling, but I'll use dollars. So in Kenya, anything from 10,000 to about 50,000, that range, will fall in the quantum of an affordable house. Now, how do we package that house to be delivered in that range? Because as the PA said, money appears to be there, and the EIB have confirmed, the AFD, there's a lot of money, tons of money. Islamic Development Bank, money is there. But why are we not getting the money to deliver this lowest cost house? One, we are saying for us to be effective, let's establish what we call Project Preparation Fund. This Project Preparation Fund will first of all go in 3 aspects. 1, technical feasibility. Then commercial viability. And 3, environmental sustainability. So we need to package these projects when they come to Shelter Afrique or any financial institution that, look, there's a project here. Because if you get it wrong there, you will not deliver a lowest cost house. You find that 1 is undercosted, 2 is not fully funded, 3, there's no offtake. So first of all, let's package these projects to be bankable. So hence, the establishment of a project preparation fund for us as Shelter Afrique to deliver to our 44 countries is #1 key. And that is work in progress. It's going to work because you don't want to wait 6 months you are evaluating a project, you are appraising a project, 1 year. No. So let's put up a project preparation fund in which Shelter Afrique has invested seed capital, and then we organize money also from other DFIs. Then #2, How do we bake the cake? Supply side. And here, various speakers have mentioned, we need a workable government-private sector partnership. In other words, the triple Ps, public-private partnerships. Public, simple, everybody has defined government. Government is the guarantor and provider of the social goods. Housing is the basic need, among with food, shelter, shelter being house, and of course clothing. So government cannot run away from having a workable, triple P framework. And we are simply telling our shareholders, we have told them in Africa to say, look, you as government, you own vast lands of land across state governments, provincial or county governments, even local governments. They do own land. So why don't we take that land and avail it to a developer to put up affordable housing units? As the PA said, our own calculation has shown us the cost of land alone is in the range of 10 to 60%. 10% where there's so much of socialism and so on, if it's there, and 60% Kenya is very much free market. So you can imagine you actually solve that, and it has worked. There's a project in Kenya now, which the land was availed by the county government. They are able, because of just government providing land and giving tax incentives in terms of imported steel, imported the other raw materials, which are vast in Africa. That project has been able to deliver a one-bedroom house at 1 million shilling. At today's exchange rate, we're talking about $7,000, one bedroom. A two-bedroom at 2.5 million shilling. That's just about $18,000. A three-bedroom, 3.5 million shillings. That's just about $28,000. Purely by mere government intervention, without government providing the land, those houses will not be affordable. Because on the same development, and this we can do as a case study, on the same development, there's a section which is what we call commercial, where you remove the incentives provided by government. There, a one-bedroom house is going for 6 million shilling. That's about 50,000. So you can see the difference there. The other one, same design, but because it's commercial, government does not avail land, no tax incentives, and most important, where that land is provided, we want bulk and link infrastructure provided. Put in the roads, put in the power, put in the water, sewer, and social amenities. And this has been seen where government has been proactive, that you can actually deliver such a house. Okay? So it's very important. We can't run away from that. Number 3, demand side. Now, demand side is pretty easy, but it's up to government policy. There you want to say, can the lowest paid citizens afford to get a mortgage? And we know in Africa, there are no very defined 20-year, 30-year mortgages. Because that's what we need. There are 5-year, 10-year mortgages. At what interest rates? Very high. Solution there is, look, let's provide long-tenured mortgages at low interest rates. How? Governments have actually to set up mortgage refinancing companies, and they are there. And Shelter Free, we have even invested, put in Ikuti, Kenya mortgage refinance, Tanzania mortgage refinance, Nigeria mortgage. So World Bank provides the seed money at concessional funding. And then that money, in terms of pricing, in local currency terms, it must come at single digit. Then you graduate a 5-year mortgage to a 10 to 15-year at a below single-digit rate. Because, for example, Kenya is a very developed market in East Africa. But guess what? It only has 30,000 mortgages out of 50 million population. Because they are not affordable. So we need to have affordable mortgages for lower segments of the population. And when that happens, those refinancing companies will be more. So that's what has happened. So Shelter Free, we actually invest in that. So they deliver both the demand side. It's very important. Supply, demand, and finally, technology. Let's not stick ourselves to brick and mortar. Technology is evolving. There's a green aspect being emphasized. So we need also this alternative technology. Okay? If you do that, you actually cut the cost of production during my house by another 30 to 40%. Our people are used to brick and mortar, but we don't have to do that now. No. There is first a cultural mindset required. So there are a lot of alternative technologies. For example, 3D printing cuts delivery of a house by 30%. It does that. There's a study also showing that you can actually deliver a house of $10,000, but you must have a prerequisite of at least 5,000 units because of alternative technology. So I'll end there.
Thank you so much. Let's give Kingsley. I had to cut him short because I could see like he was getting into preaching now. And I know a lot of us are converted. I think Kingsley introduces something that we've had for the first time in this session. I think the rest had been tackled. And this is the issue of technology. And we're talking about industrial building techniques. It's not like, when we talk about housing, it's not like people live in the forest or live on top of trees or out in the streets. They live in houses. Whether those houses meet the high standards of what we call adequate housing with basic facilities is another question. And the only way we are going to tackle this challenge is by scale. Scale is very important. And we're going to come back to that. But Femi, my old friend, it's good to see you after many years.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Former MD also at Shelter Africa. The same question as I asked Kingsley.
Okay, thank you, Charles, and thank you, fellow panelists. Thank you for inviting me. Femi Adewale, I'm Managing Director at the Family Homes Funds. The Family Homes Funds is a joint venture between the government of Nigeria and the Nigerian Sovereign Wealth Fund. And the $1 billion fund was put together to stimulate a fairly significant housing program as part of a wider social intervention program for the government. It's a new organization, barely 2.5 years old, but in that period is delivered the largest supply of new housing in the market since the country's independence. In 2022, it expects to complete just under 30,000 homes, which is small, but a fairly significant number. I think the question is, what is the delivery mechanism? And I think I'm a trained architect, and we have a maxim in architecture that says form follows function. So before you kind of try to describe the form of this delivery mechanism, you first need to understand what is the problem that we're trying to solve. And now I spent about 20 years of my career working in Europe, in European housing, and the last 13 years in the African housing sector. But for the purposes of this discussion, I'll focus on the learnings from our European experience, but also what we've done in Nigeria and the previous experience in Shelter Africa. Right. There are some very specific nuances around housing in Africa. So if I take Nigeria, for example, 83% of Nigerians earn less than $200 a month. Okay, so the low-income segment of the population is not a minority, as you will find in a developed economy. It's a significant proportion of the population. So a housing strategy needs to be more focused on what you're doing with that segment of the population. And the fact is, across the continent, whatever it is that we have been doing over the last 40 years have frankly not worked. I think the keynote address by the Vice President was quite poignant, but I think more specifically poignant to Africa in the sense that we now have a generation of 20-somethings who will find it almost impossible to own their own homes. Affordability is increasing, only out of the reach of this generation, and as a consequence, most of them will have very significant challenges of forming families or living an independent life. So there's been a lot of discussion, and I think those have been raised here about the factors around land, about cost of construction. I think those are very legitimate, but I consider those to be a push factor. I really want to look at this from a pull factor perspective, and there are three aspects to that. The first one is when we talk about affordable housing in sub-Saharan Africa particularly, what are we talking about? What does affordable housing mean to someone who's earning $50 a month? Okay, what kind of house does that mean? What does it mean where a significant segment of the city, the urban geography, is in the informal sector? Are we, as we have been doing over the last 40 years, layering imported methodologies of pulling down and rebuilding houses? Is that the way? I think that there is a need for innovative thinking about what an appropriate housing strategy that speaks to the socio-economic nuances of sub-Saharan Africa is. Except we get that right and move away quite significantly from a predisposition to building greenfield developments, we are unlikely to solve the problem. Okay? The second lens is from the point of view, and I think somebody mentioned this, of the value chain. The value chain for housing supply in sub-Saharan Africa is absolutely broken. And there's no linkages between them, and that is something that we need to look at. So if you take the supply side, there's absolutely no economy of scale, primarily because, again, if I take Nigeria as an example, a country of 200 million people, you can't find a single developer who is building 1,000 homes per annum on a consistent basis. So it's heavily fragmented through very small-scale developers, highly inefficient, unable to manage any complex supply or indeed value chain, a huge amount of wastage and high cost. And the same thing happens also on the demand side. On the demand side, you're looking at a very narrow focus on mortgage, again, because the predisposition is around a formal set of housing. So if you take Nigeria again, for example, which has got about 36 mortgage banks, on average, they have less than 500 mortgages in their portfolio. I sit on the board of a couple of them. One of them, which actually services the housing market in Lagos, a city of 20 million people, has 36 mortgages on its books. So these are the key breakages and that leading there. I think that Kingsley mentioned technology. We need to leverage technology into beginning to integrate the supply chain and the value chain in the housing delivery. And finally, weak capacity. I talked about the fact that both on the demand side and the supply side, there's significant weakness in terms of the operators. And I think this feeds into government's approach to housing, because there are no major players, there are no major voices. It's very difficult for them to be taken seriously and make the kind of legislation. So in Nigeria, for example, we have Dangote, a big player. Because he's huge, he's big, he has the muscle to drive and to push for government policies that work for his industry. And I think one of the key asks for us at the Family Homes Fund, working with a number of DFIs, some of whom are here, is we're looking to incubate at least 6 unicorns on the demand and supply side. This represents, so when we talk about delivery mechanism, talking about private sector owned but government supported supply side players, i.e. developers and mortgage banks that have capacity adequately capitalized to build tens of thousands of units per annum. That means they can leverage on economies of scale. They have a loud voice to drive government policy and inform appropriate policies that ensure that some of the issues around land is dealt with. Finally, in terms of delivery mechanism, I should say this. A huge amount of the policies for Nigeria, and indeed most African countries, have been over the last 40 years primarily focused on housing for sale. You know, so the largest intervention over the last decade, primarily by the World Bank, and I should say it, has been around promoting mortgage refinance companies with very, very limited impact. This is in a continent where a large proportion of the population can't access a mortgage. We think a delivery mechanism that focuses and mainstreams formal sector rental housing is a major policy shift that's got to happen in sub-Saharan Africa. And because the title of this is working across continents, I think that we've got to learn a lot from the very successful affordable and social housing experiments in France, in Holland, and in England that have created strong institutions that are providing affordable rental housing for people at the bottom of the income ladder in very secure tenures. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Femi. I think between the two of them, Shelter Afrique, former CEO and current CEO, a lot of food for thought, some of it very provocative for us to consume, because one of the questions that we need to ask is, do people rent because they like renting, or they rent because they cannot afford to buy? And then the question is buying or owning a home more important than having a decent home? I think those are very mind-boggling issues. And as I come to you now as an audience, I want you to prepare, we want to hear from you about some of these issues that are being put here. But I just like to highlight one of the things that Femi spoke about, especially in Africa, and this is the very high percentage of our workers are in the informal sector. We have a lot of people who work in the informal sector. Formal sector, we only have 2.4 million. So as you can see, the formal products may not work. And that is why we need to think outside the box. And that's why we need to come up with homegrown solutions, but also look at other areas where they fixed those issues. So I'm going to come to you, and I also want you to think about one more question, and that is, do we have a housing problem, or do we have a transport problem? And I think that introduces a very important aspect between land use planning and transport planning. Two key things, but I think in most areas are implemented separately. And I think that is part of the reason why we have a challenge of the two. But we'll come back to that. But my good friend Omar, UN Habitat has been at the forefront of pushing this message on affordability. In Kenya, I know we are partnering on a housing project that will deliver about 5,500 units. But as an institution that the entire globe places the weight of sorting out these matters of urbanization, and you've heard about the issues that have been canvassed here. maybe just sum up from where you're sitting. Are we going to be able to overcome these challenges of housing in Africa and correspondingly globally?
Thank you very much, moderator. Let me use my convening roles as United Nations and do some mediation. And the reason I'm sitting here, I'm just trying to link, whatever we hear, because we have development partner here getting the credit and the future, envelope. We have implementers with vehicles. We have, other part of the situation, which is really unlocking the financial situation through private sectors. But also in the room, we have governments. Ministers are here. Local government are here. So the question I'm putting to them is how you can work together. We have been talking, as you mentioned, the issue of housing for how many years? Since I embraced this job as expert on housing of land, I think the issue of land is here. How many countries have effective land registration system today? And we are still facing the issue of traditional authorities, customary system. Of course, some country has made, strive on sorting out this issue of land, but there are 2 or 3 in Africa. And you talk on your introduction, the bottleneck coming from this land management in terms of prices, but also in terms of social cohesion. We are talking about 1 billion people coming to cities. You talk about 100 million deficit, and this will increase as well. And today, we have seen even the deficit of infrastructure. We are talking billion of deficit of infrastructure in terms of road and others. Let's look at those in the informal settlement as well. 64% of population informal settlement without adequate housing. So the whole question is, when we talk about solidarity and inclusivity, when we talk about cooperation, what type of cooperation do you want to bring in Africa to really accelerate the delivery of affordable housing? Of course, in the perspective of UN Habitat, we are talking about housing in the center. When it comes to housing in the center, it means that we are not looking only on concrete, but linking to other ingredients you need. And today, we will see from this COVID-19, health is one parameter. We have the economic dimension, and today the youth expecting from this sector to get access to jobs. So which means that we need to be innovative and maybe get out of the competitions. I know banks want to invest. We have Islamic Development Bank here. We have we have Agence Française de Développement. We have European Investment Bank. But the question is how to create a port and drive a change in terms of paradigm of engaging with government. And I think that's what I call some thinking we have been doing, over the last 6 months, and building on the momentum of the SDG 11 to see how we can develop a compact. What does it mean, compact? It doesn't mean that you are creating something new. It's about federating and all those force in terms of financing and skills and traction to come together to support the demand from the government. And when it comes to the compact, one element which is fundamental, of course, the political momentum. So we are hearing a lot of now declaration on target on housing in many countries, 100,000 units, 200,000 units, but they are not going anywhere today. Senegal, my country, Kenya, I think PS is pushing it. But at the end of the day, why it's not working? That's the whole question. And also the failure of public policy we have seen over the past. Today, I think we need a new model of generating and triggering this public momentum. And on that, it's not just looking into Ministry of Housing. I think yesterday we discussed it, Femi. You brought a good point. How we can bring Ministry of Finance. At the end of the day, is the one who's going to make the decision. And we have not seen a lot going there. Most of the time it's recourse into debt or to external, financing system. But locally, I think there's possibility to unlock this own source revenue, unlock another means to really support this housing sector. Not only financing, bankable projects, but at least put seed money on the table for things to pick. The other area which is very important, of course, unlocking the financial mechanism. You talk about it. But for us now, I think look at in different mechanisms. We talk about public-private partnership, but also we shouldn't forget people partnership as well. When you talk about financial mechanism, we talk about subsidies, but it may not be enough. But the whole question is how to galvanize and mobilize the capacity of community as well to be part of PAS. I think that's what you're trying on the model of Morocco to make sure at least community as part of PAS, because they have something to contribute, not necessarily from the capital we have seen. Another point, I think you talk about it, the delivery delivery mechanism. I mean, today, I think we have seen a lot of change in terms of paradigm on the housing sectors. We need to look at the policies as well, and to get direction, give direction to government and how they want to really go to this, journey of developing this affordable housing. And what's the policy? Of course, we need to look at different parameters. Today, we have the green building process. We need to look at the energy efficiencies, and we need to integrate, a lot of dimensions that have been missing in the first generation of policy to really make sure we have the vehicle of housing delivery. I think those are some reflections I want to put on the table, and we'll be happy to proceed and to deepen this reflection on the question on how we can work together to really support government of delivering this affordable housing at scale. Thank you very much, moderators.
Thank you so much. A round of applause for Omar, speaking with a lot of conviction and passion. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like now to come to the floor. Before I come back to my panelists, you can ask a specific question. You can make a contribution, but kindly take the shortest time possible. Just go straight to the point, and just start by introducing your name and then your question or comment. I'm going to start here. We've got 1, 2. So there's a gentleman that raised his hand on that side. Name? Is there somebody at the back? Honorable Minister. In fact, we're going to start with our Honorable Minister, and then we're going to come back to you, if you allow. And those ushers, if I can get, what do you call them? The translation devices, and for our people here, so that you'll speak in English? You're speaking at the end. Okay, the minister is going to speak in French at the end. All right, so let's shoot. Is there anybody who has the microphone to assist? Okay.
I'm called Martin.
Kindly speak up.
Hello? I'm called Martin Barugahare. I work for UN Habitat, but not in housing sector. What I've heard from panelists, of course, there is a great correlation between the challenge of rapid urbanization and the challenge of affordable housing. But from these discussions, really, continents are different as much as the countries are different. From Africa, Arab countries, Latin America. Can we have specific example of these countries where we can say to this extent in this country, in this continent, somehow affordable housing is working, so that we can learn from their policies, we can borrow from examples of investment, so that we can apply it to other countries. Thank you.
Right. Quickly, name and straight to the point.
Thank you. My name is Timothy Nubi, a professor of housing and urban regeneration, University of Lagos, Nigeria. I believe that my first attendance at World Urban Forum was at Vancouver 2005. And we left that meeting agreeing that we will not gather again to discuss problems, but we will showcase best practices. And years after, I'm still hearing problems. The problem we have in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, the issue of over-concentration on new builds. Over-concentration on new builds. Everyone that discusses housing in sub-Saharan Africa, their emphasis is always on new houses, new houses. But the question is that Africans were living somewhere. For many years, we've been discussing the slums across Africa. What's happening to the slums? In 1968, Martin Luther King led the protest against slum in Chicago. Today, Chicago is a beautiful place. So what's the emphasis? Because I'm tired of hearing land. Somebody still saying that the problem of housing in Africa is land. Where 100% almost 60% of the built-up areas in the cities across Africa have been abused. We see sprawl in Africa. We see sprawl in Africa. People are living in houses already. All we need in Africa in the next 20 years is massive urban regeneration. Massive urban regeneration. Let investors begin to look at how do we clean up the slums? How do we do massive investment in slum areas? Let funders begin to look at urban regeneration and not necessarily focus on new build. Lagos, 70% of Lagos land area had been built up through these slum communities. That if today we do massive urban regeneration, this land will be freed. So land is not the problem in Africa. There was a time when we talk about affordability, there was a time cars were not affordable. There was a time computers were not affordable in these same African countries. But today, what made those houses, what made cars, what made computers to be affordable? Is it because they've increased or decreased their, is it because they've increased income? No.
Can you wrap up?
Yes, because these things were produced, were industrialized, were produced on large scale until we build very simple economies. When we go for large scale production, cost, we crash. But as long as we are building individual houses on a plot in prime area like Lagos, then we've not started.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And then, gentlemen, yeah, you can come. Okay. Get the microphone there, please. Food for thought. Land is not the problem. Urban regeneration.
Yes. Okay, my name is Richard Frederick. I am from the beautiful island of St. Lucia, Minister of Housing and Local Government down there. The story from Nigeria is very, very touching. It is touching when you hear 83% of persons in Nigeria work for less than $200 a month. Affordability does not exist in a vacuum. Affordability is congruent, it's annexed to the economic environment in which you operate. When you hear of a city of 20 million with only a bank there with 36 mortgages on its books, it speaks to two things. One, there is a vast inequality in wealth distribution, or secondly, there is a desire and an urgent need to revamp the economic environment to make those locals entitled to get their fair share of the country. That is how I read it. Because you see, even if a house is affordable and you're not working for the money, you can give all incentives you want. It will not change the price of steel if you source it on the international market. It will not change the price of galvanized, of cement, if you don't manufacture it. The inputs remain a constant. There is only so much a government can do. So essentially, your economy needs revisiting to ensure that there is greater wealth distribution to make those persons more accessible to income that would revamp their entitlement and affordability. That's one. The second thing, the affordability of homes must take a multidimensional approach. Land alone cannot be the only criterion that will ensure that houses become affordable. In St. Lucia, what we have realized is that we better go higher with less area space so that 50 people share the price of the foundation, of the utilities, of the structure, and in that way, the per unit cost goes down. But it takes three units to make it as affordable as possible. One, government's intervention and literally giving away the land. 2, increased and improved technology. We all know that the steel frame buildings, look what is happening in Rwanda. Rwanda is putting down 800,000 homes in a couple of years with improved technology. And of course, the lending institutions must ensure that they shoulder a moral responsibility and discharge it by attempting to lower their profits in the interest of our people being empowered.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you very much. Right, we have another hand here. Behind me, there's nobody who's, I don't want to discriminate you. Okay, yes. We have one hand there. Okay, thank you. Name and straight to the point, and I hope my panelists, you're taking some of the notes. I'm going to come back to you.
Yes, my name's Hiribae from Kenya. So my issue was on the issue of in Kenya we have both the national government and the county governments, which I think for here we call them local governments. So for the issue from the national government, we have the Ministry of Housing, which is also devolved. We have we have the Department of Housing from the local government. So in these meetings, in the model that you have, were the county government involved? Because even land is a devolved function in Kenya. Then on the issue of affordability, as you have said, 80% of our citizens in Kenya, they are in the informal sector jobs. So even if we come with the issue of let's say for the housing corporation, which is a benefit of those who have personal numbers that are working formal government jobs. So how will we bring in the 80% that we are saying that is our target market for this investment? Thank you.
Thank you very much. There was one person from this side. Okay. We'll take that round first, and then if time permits, I can see time is moving quite fast. We'll have one last round, and of course, with our Honorable Minister giving some remarks.
Ok, merci Monsieur Drissa Koulibaly du Mali. En fait, l'accès au logement, je suis d'accord.
As we've said, I do agree that it's important to ensure access to housing, but it's also important to ensure access to municipal services. And I am referring to schools and hospitals. And here I can see that there is a gap to be bridged in this regard. I do realize that they need to be equipped properly. And it's also very important to transfer skills and competences in these sectors. It is important to create development programs in these areas.
So I hope Omar will help us in translating.
Logistics, sorry.
Okay. All right. I'm sure we'll get somebody who can help us in translation for that. Hey? Okay. I'll come back. I want us to very quickly, my panelists, 1 minute each, not too long. All right. From Martin, the question was specific examples of countries where affordable housing is working. Maybe from your financing, multiple jurisdictions, you can be able to give us an example. Timothy from University of Lagos. In Vancouver, we said we don't talk about problems, and we're still talking about problems. But I guess the main issue here is, or the main question here is about the role of urban regeneration. The minister, apologies, I didn't get the name, but from St. Lucia, talked about affordability not existing in a vacuum, and talks of the vast inequalities, and talked about the issue of wealth redistribution. And then there is a gentleman from Kenya, and I believe that question you're directing to me. All right, so I will be able to answer your questions. So, but very quickly, 1 minute each, if you can, whichever question, you don't have to repeat what the other person has said. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the rich questions. Let me just tackle the one on urban regeneration. This is obviously a key one, and I agree. We should not only focus on new houses, and we are focusing, and I know that my colleagues here to the left are also looking very much on urban regeneration. We are working together with UN Habitat on a slum regeneration program in Kenya, and we are quite excited about the developments there. Let me just add one more point on, do we have a transport or do we have a housing problem? In fact, we probably have both, and as you rightly said, PS, it's key to have a proper coordination from the top and also at the regional and local level in order to ensure that we have also us to come into the play of finance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we know that the EIB, together with your partners, you're doing quite a lot on this issue of urbanization, and we thank you very much.
Thank you. I, of course, agree on what you say about slum upgrading, about informal settlement improvement, which is the second part of the question, and I think we should know both. We should do both, improvement of informal settlement and producing new affordable housing units. Just to be very quick, I will share with you an example, a concrete example of large production of affordable housing in the north of Africa, because it's in Morocco, and the experience we had with the holding Al Omran. Just to give you the context, Morocco is experiencing rapid urbanization, and 20 years ago, a Moroccan government decided to put in place a comprehensive public policy on urban development and affordable housing, and created a strong public institution. This is the holding Al Omran. So Al Omran is a public enterprise that provides bulk infrastructure for housing, enters in PPP with private sector to build housing, and builds also social housing by itself when private sector cannot afford building for low-income household. So, for its affordable and most social mandate, Al Omran has access to public financial incentives such as a national fund finance on tax on cement and from add value tax abatements. AFD has supported holding Al Omran since its creations, and we have committed in all 400 million euros of loans. Just to give you some figure, and just to focus on what is interesting in terms of replicability with this example, is that we have a strong national public policy that achieves scale in terms of supply of affordable housing, and they have the City Without Slums program for that. And in 15 years, they achieved to bring new houses for 400 million households. And they are able to provide land the land is provided by state at large scale. Mm-hmm. And the public operator has a sufficiently robust financial model to be able to also cross-subsidize affordable housing units with the more profitable housing they are producing as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Abdullah?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm glad there is somebody from Mali, because in Mali, the Islamic Development Bank financed a successful housing project. It's called social housing in Bamako, and then the objective was really to target low income, low and middle income, people earning 80 euro or up to 300 euros per month. And in the first phase, the government asked the bank just to provide the basic services, access to the electricity, water supply, sanitation, access road, and so on and so forth. And on that, we built 1,500 units. In the second phase, the bank financed the construction itself, and we built another 1,000 units. So this is a clear example of successful housing that was done at the government level. Now, just to very quickly to mention on the urbanization, urban regeneration, I think it has to, as my colleague said, it has to go above. Sometimes it's much easier to go for green land and to build new houses. But in some slums, the issue can be the title deeds. Many of the residents, they don't have the title deeds. It would be very difficult to bring services on those urban and those slums areas. So that's why sometimes the question has to be asked: what is the best solution to relocate these people, or really to bring a new one? And finally, the question that was asked in French, I think our colleague was asking, basically, it's good to build houses, but also all the necessity of the facilities that goes with it, the hospital, the schools, and so on and so forth, so that people living on those areas are not isolated and far away from all the other facilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for assisting us with that translation as well. Thank you very much. Kings?
Yeah, on the question of where is affordable housing schemes working, I wanted to mention Morocco. It has been mentioned. I want to repeat. Rwanda have actually seen affordable housing schemes working. Yes, scale is here to go up, but there is a policy there, and there's actually a policy to get rid of slums by 2050. Kenya has got a deliberate policy, affordable housing policy. Yes, 500,000 was put as a target, but it's work in progress. Nigeria, I was in Nigeria in March. I saw deliberate affordable housing schemes, but it's a question of scale. In short, where there's a policy and the way governments are doing that, and I think most governments are committed. Now, how do we crowd in the 80% informal sector? I know you answer that, moderator, but I've seen in Kenya, we worked with FD, the French Development Agency, whereby they gave us a line of credit to go to a microfinance targeting the trading women on the streets. And they gave us in local currency, Kenyan shilling, so there's no foreign currency risk. And they prescribed the maximum percentage interest rate to charge, which was single digit in Kenyan shilling. Before COVID came, that was a very successful, saving and credit scheme, natural. Only COVID disturbed it. So if there's a targeted will, you can actually reach the informal sector.
Thank you so much. Right, Femi?
Okay, thank you, Chairman. I think, but just taking the question on the slum upgrading and urban regeneration, I think that's absolutely right. That was part of the point that was being made. And I think the truth is that we're not doing anywhere near enough on that front. One, because it's difficult to do, and two, because we don't have institutions who have the muscle to take on the complications that are involved in it. But I think as we build capacity, that has to be the place to look in terms of creating new housing that are also sustainable, because in most cases, these are places right at the center of town and very near where people actually work. So I think that has to be a work in progress. In terms of where is affordable housing working, so I'm going to be very provocative here, and I think I'm going to draw my example from perhaps where I learned my trade from, and I think the British housing system is one that a lot of African countries need to look in terms of the balance between social rented housing and housing for sale. So there's a very strong balance and supply and demand between all of the different segments of the market. It doesn't get the credit that it deserves, but I think that there's a huge amount of stuff there that a lot of African countries can look at, and certainly the work that we are doing the Family Homes Fund is drawing quite significantly from the success of that system, building very strong institutions that can do urban regeneration, that can do new build. I think the same applies in most European countries, but I think I can safely say I know exactly what's going on in the British housing system. Thank you
so much. And I'll take the question from the gentleman from Kenya, which was very specific to Kenya. Were the county governments involved? Yes, they were involved. In fact, we signed MOUs with each and every one of them. And as you correctly said, counties own land. And right now, I have my MD for National Housing Corporation. You can stand there, and some board members. They are entering also into MOUs with counties purely because they do not have development or housing development agencies. And when you have something that has a commercial flavor, you need almost like a body corporate that can enter into agreements, the PPPs that we spoke about. So you need that body corporate. Counties don't have that, so National Housing Corporation is entering into agreements with them where they give the land to National Housing Corporation. National Housing Corporation goes and looks for investors. They also have a little bit of their money, and they co-invest. And they are currently doing that in a number of counties. And the second question on the issue of affordability. I don't want to repeat everything that has been said here about affordability, but let me just discuss one aspect on social housing. Can you be able to deliver social housing from a commercial perspective? It's a very difficult thing to do because, you know, when you look at all those elements that we spoke about, you know, cost is cost. There's very little you can be able to do about the cost of steel. Whether that house is for someone who is living in an informal settlement or living in, you know, other areas. The cost is cost. Now, the areas where you can be able to provide some relief, for example, is coming up with innovative structures like what we call multi-generational tenant purchase scheme. So that's what we are doing now in some of the informal settlements. So we make the tenure so long that you can pass on that house to the next generation and next generation, so that you are able to equate the affordability to the size of their pocket. We have also lowered the cost of interest from, if you look at our commercial, which is 9% fixed, to 3% fixed. And when you translate that to the amount of money, it is actually the same amount of money that they are paying for a shack is what they are paying for a decent house. The only challenge is that we are not able to get the scale, and the number of informal settlements coming up far outstrips the number that you're constructing. Therefore, it looks like there's not much that is being done. But if you don't get the basic issues sorted out, you will not be able to resolve issues of housing. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe our time is so gone, and I'd like to recognize the presence of our ED and a very good friend. Let's give her a round of applause. ED, we've had a very, very rich discussion with a very rich panel. And I believe that we are leaving here much more empowered than we came in. And I know you are supposed to give us some opening remarks. And welcome the President of Ecosoc. Thank you so much. So I'm going to quickly ask, and I know we had said our minister from Cameroon was also going to give some very quick remarks as well. So I'm just going to vacate here, and I'm going to ask the minister from Cameroon to come and give some quick remarks, and the president of Ecosoc, and then the ED will crown it up for us, and I will come and just give you a few takeaways. Minister, welcome.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate your way to manage this panel. Je vais parler en français pour éviter de mal m'exprimer
I will speak in French because and this is the language I feel comfortable speaking in. I would like to welcome Mr. President Kops, the President of Ecosoc. I would like to thank you for all the presentations that you have delivered and we had a chance to listen to, and thank you for the way of moderating this panel. We had representatives of the banks, including the Islamic Bank, Islamic Development Bank. I believe that the persons that are present here are able to have other people interested in affordable housing, in the issues of affordable housing. And sustainability is based on this kind of housing, inter alia. I often refer to African countries. If we have a family consisting of a mother, a father, and one child, this can be affordable, but in Africa, very often families have numerous members, and it transpires that we have to build a new house and for those families, and that's how cities grow. But unfortunately, those housing is not good quality. So why do we have this problem connected with the housing mainly in Africa? Some of you said that the purchasing power does not allow it. But we have such products as Coca-Cola, we have products which are very expensive, we have products which are very cheap, so we have to change the paradigm. We were talking about the example of Cameroon here. Where there is a problem, there is always some occasion, some opportunity. But if it's not working, it means that there is a problem. The problem here is management. The problem is the change of the mindset. The problem is the adaptation, the innovation. We can build a house for a person like me, but we have to also take into account other people. We were talking about the governmental subsidies. In Cameroon, for example, a subsidy program was implemented at a large scale, but what didn't work? We were talking about the change of paradigm. Many people still don't understand it. Based on our example, we can say that housing helped us to build resilience during the COVID-19 epidemic. We had social housing, we had social apartments that we could use for the people who were sick with COVID-19 disease. To isolate them, we can also settle people there, the people who are victims of natural disasters. Many times we place such people in schools where conditions are much worse. That's why I would like to share with you this example, the approach of my country, which is quite innovative. We have the former president of the Administrative Council, the former executive director and the administrative director. And I wish that you were speaking about the real problems that would allow us to eliminate the deficit of apartments in the market. We have to change the management system. People have to find the solution together. If we act separately, we will not manage to do it. Taxi drivers who use motorcycles. This is a project that we have implemented quite recently, and it restores human dignity. It was an exceptional experience, thanks to which those taxi drivers can be owners, because the deputies, we were talking about with the deputies about forming zones. We would like to form a sustainable city. We have deputies among us, and together with the deputies, we carry out very important projects. Thank you for your attention.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Bien. Madame la ministre, merci de me donner l'occasion de présenter très rapidement l'expérience camerounaise qui essaie de concilier à la fois trois problématiques.
I would like to share my thoughts about construction materials. I would like to refer to the projects financed. The first of the project is the urban project for communes, for decentralization. Communes use the transfer of competence. Among those sectors, there is this housing sector. The program was implemented 5 years ago. For approximately $20,000, then I'm sorry, $20 million, then $30 million, and due to this, people who wanted to settle in the city were able to do that. Then this program was directed to those people, and these were people with low income. These were taxi drivers who used motorcycles. And we have opened a credit line for $1 million. So these are projects that are based on experience and innovation. And I believe I will have an opportunity to say more about it. And this is a very good example. Thank you very much.
My esteemed colleague, I served with him in the board of Shelter Africa. Thank you so much. Because of time, I know we would like to continue, and I can see the excitement, but allow me now to call His Excellency Colin Vixen Kelapile, who's the president of Ecosoc, to make some brief remarks, followed by Maimouna Mod Sharif, the executive director for UN Habitat. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, for this opportunity to offer a few remarks. I wish I could speak as passionately as the minister without referring to any documents, but if you allow me, let me just utilize my remarks. Madam Under Secretary General and the Executive Director of UN Habitat, Ms. Maimouna Sharif, and I understand the Vice President of the European Investment Bank was also here. Your Excellency, Madam Celestine Kecha Cortes, the Minister of Urban Development of Cameroon. Your Excellencies, I understand there are also other honorable ministers here present. Ladies and gentlemen, let me say that I was supposed to deliver these remarks earlier at the opening, but in view of the travel constraints from Portugal, Lisbon, where we have been attending the Ocean Conference, the arrival here was delayed, especially as we were trying to land. We were told there was some storm gathering around the airport. So allow me to still proceed to really say I'm really deeply honored to be able to offer the remarks at this special session on delivering affordable housing across continents. On this very occasion of the 11th World Urban Forum. The topic of this forum, transforming our cities for a better urban future, strongly resonates with the mandate of the UN Economic and Social Council, Ecosoc, and is actually also very central to the priorities that I set up myself when I took over the presidency of Ecosoc last July. As part of the Council's mandate to monitor and review implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, we at Ecosoc strongly believe that cities play a pivotal role in achieving all the SDGs, thus offering the perfect opportunity to address all the 17 goals in an integrated way and with a longer-term perspective. We also firmly believe that due to its cross-sectoral nature and its role as a cornerstone of improving people's quality of life, adequate housing has shown the potential as the engine of inclusive and sustainable development. Safe, affordable, and sustainable housing is a constituting element, if you may, of poverty reduction by providing access to shelter and other basic services, as well as urban opportunities at an affordable cost. Quality housing is key to building resilience to economic, social, health, and environmental shocks. Furthermore, safe and well-located and affordable housing allows people to access quality and stable education, health and welfare services, employment opportunities, public amenities, and green spaces, which in turn reduces inequalities. Housing also plays a catalytic role in urban economic development and employment generation. The housing sector virtually touches every single aspect of the economy of any country and has close interface with practically every other sector, from technology, research, water and sanitation, building, industry, land and property rights, and the financial sector. In addition, quality and sustainable housing is central in addressing climate change and reducing pollution. The building and construction sector is responsible for nearly 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions and consumes large shares of resources, as you may be aware. With the building stock set to double by 2050, emissions, energy, and resource consumption are set to also increase unless we adopt modern measures to improve the sustainability of building materials, the design of households, and of urban expansion adapted to the way we consume energy and water, as well as waste management. Excellencies, ultimately designing and building adequate and quality housing for all essentially means shaping inclusive and prosperous cities and communities. Unfortunately, as highlighted also in the recent quadrennial report on the implementation of the new urban agenda, which was submitted to the General Assembly through Ecosoc, housing is becoming more and more unaffordable to many. Slums continue to grow globally, and homelessness is on the rise. Urban planning and development often reach only those that are already well off and those who can afford quality housing. As also reminded by the UN Secretary General in his report on our common agenda, a renewed social contract that builds trust and embraces a comprehensive set of human rights is needed. Among the four core elements of the new social contract, there is the right to adequate housing for all and the call for governments to respect, protect, and fulfill their fundamental right. As I also previously pointed out at the Ecosoc special session on the new urban agenda, which I convened on the 21st of April in the lead up to the high-level meeting of the General Assembly, which was held on the 28th of April, housing has become a commercial commodity, and urban land markets are often captured by financial interests. Therefore, member states and their governments are urged to position quality and affordable housing, above all, as a basic need and a human right. As also reminded by the UN Secretary General in his report on our common agenda, which was launched last September, a renewed social contract to rebuild trust and embrace a comprehensive vision of human rights is needed, as I said already. Excellencies, to ensure that the positive outcomes of urbanization do not leave anyone behind, we also need to recommit to an integrated approach of housing, land use, and infrastructure. Better urban planning can enable the provision of quality and affordable housing and the upgrading of slums, which are connected to livelihood opportunities and a typical manifestation of inequality, with access to infrastructure, transportation, and other services, and thus contributing to the reduction of spatial inequalities, fragmentation, and urban sprawls. Lastly, but also very important, the challenge to unlock financing for quality and affordable housing and other essential services should be seized as an opportunity to create much-needed jobs through the local production of housing and a catalyst to enhance endogenous revenue that the cities raise. Let me conclude, Your Excellencies, by reassuring that Ecosoc is fully committed to working closely with you as an inclusive platform to accelerate our efforts to deliver affordable housing for everyone, everywhere, especially now as we work to build back better from the devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, which unfortunately has exacerbated inequalities. I am glad that this session and the World Urban Forum itself will be the occasion to strengthen knowledge sharing and collaborations on how to transform our cities for a better urban future and placing green, adequate housing at the center of this transformative process. And once again, I would like to thank you sincerely for your kind attention and for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. It is now my great pleasure to invite a personal friend, someone who is very passionate on the urban agenda, Madam Maimuna Mod Sharif, to come and give the closing remark before we call it a day. Madam Edie, welcome.
Thank you, my brother. Excellencies, Honorable Minister, Honorable Mayors, Development Partners, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of UN Habitat to the 11th session of the World Urban Forum, particularly in this special session on delivering affordable housing across the continent. I also would like to express my gratitude to the European Investment Bank for co-hosting this session, Ms. Charles Hinga, my partners in crime, Principal Secretary of the Government of Kenya for moderating, and to all the other institutions participating and sharing their knowledge and experiences with us today. It is also an honor. I was informed that together this morning, Madam Teresa Selvinska, the Vice President of European Investment Bank, and I'm also very happy to welcome His Excellency Colin Kilapile, the President of Economic and Social Council, for this important discussion. UN Habitat, since its foundation, and I joined in as an ED of UN Habitat in 2018, has worked to promote the realization of the right to adequate housing for all as central to achieving socially and environmentally sustainable towns and cities. Because I came from a rural area, and I understand very much what poverty is all about. So the topic of this World Urban Forum also evokes the ways we want to transform our cities for a better urban future, where opportunities and positive outcomes of urbanization are equally distributed, so that no one and no place is left behind. At UN Habitat, we believe that access to safe, affordable, accessible, and adequate housing and well-located housing for all is central to achieving the SDG. Adequate housing is one of these transformative forces that can help cities overcome challenges related to climate change, poverty, exclusion, and inequality. It can encourage cities to embark on a path to planned, inclusive, and sustainable urbanization. We have clearly seen the centrality of housing to sustainable urban development during the negotiation and also the discussion of the new urban agenda in Quito in 2016. Then again, we have the high-level meeting on its implementation after 5 years, which was conveyed by the President of General Assembly and together with the President of Ecosoc, Excellency Kilapile, in April 28, 2022. And housing was at the forefront of the interventions by member states. From slums to gated communities, from overcrowding to sprawl, from homelessness to vacant houses, there is much evidence that housing is shaping cities worldwide despite regional, demographic, and socio-economic and cultural specificities. As noted in our flagship report, titled Cities and Pandemic, Towards a More Just, Green and Healthy Future, COVID-19 has made even clearer the necessity to address a pre-existing housing crisis reflected in the increasing unaffordability of adequate housing to a large share of the urban population. Tackling challenges from COVID-19 pandemic, climate and housing emergencies will then require, as highlighted by the UN Secretary General in our common agenda, a renewed social contract underpinned by housing for all as key for the concrete realization of human rights, social inclusion, and protection. As reminded again, what we would like to say is that by our Secretary General, this renewed social contract will need to include updated governance arrangement to deliver better public goods and to usher in a new era of universal social protection, health coverage, education, skill, decent work and housing, as well as universal access to the internet by 2030 as a basic human right. To achieve this change, it is critical for government to coordinate policies purposefully by ensuring complementarity between objective key stakeholders' role, resources and action, and to support appropriately regulated models of housing finance and provision which are resident-focused and committed to affordable, inclusive and climate-neutral housing. Attention should be paid to rethink our approach to housing finance to ensure a stronger commitment to shape financing system to achieve economic and social policy priorities to promote housing affordability, sustainable housing construction and renovation, and to address housing needs and climate goals. Achieving the right to adequate housing for all, though, also needs to be ultimately recognized as a shared responsibility of national, local government with other stakeholders, civil society, private sector, academia, and donor communities. All actors need to be involved with clear roles, commitments, and mechanisms. This is why I am particularly grateful to the European Investment Bank for having co-led the organization of the session today. I'm sure you already explored the diversity of global challenges. I'm sure you already come up with the opportunities. I'm sure you already come up with the action plan, because we don't want any more declaration. We want declared action. And I'm sure you already come up with the roadmap and the timeline, and of course, with the funding. Because without the funding, how good is the strategy, how good is the policy, how good is the design of the housing scheme or the housing without funding, without capacity to implement? I think that is will be remain on the paper. So I would like, and I'm really looking forward. I know that is my colleague Omar is taking notes of what is happening today. I'm really looking forward. We will announce the action, declared action, hopefully by the end of this World Urban Forum session on the 30th of June 2022. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edie. And we look forward to the 30th of June for the declaration. Our time is so much gone. And I know my panelists, you're supposed to give final word. Can I trust you to take 1 minute each? Just final word, kindly.
Thank you so much for the nice words. I've learned a lot, which is the purpose of this partnership and this exchanges. And well, good luck, and we stand ready to support this transformation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Audrey?
Thank you very much. I just like to say that we are determined to do more for the housing sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Abdullah.
Thank you. First of all, to thank UN Habitat for inviting us, and to say that the key words, as mentioned by my colleague, is a partnership. There are so many issues that we need a strong partnership to solve housing issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Kings.
Yeah, thank you so much, EIB, for hosting this, and also the Habitat. For me, I plead to our governments, please put in place workable public-private partnership to deliver affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from myself, just to sum up a couple of takeaways. First of all, from the EIB, already committed 100 billion euros towards this particular sector, and promised to provide more, especially fund urban infrastructure, which is very important in the delivery of the housing. Then there was an issue of housing systems oriented to be financially sustainable. I think the word sustainability is a very topical issue. And the question that was posed is, how can sustainability and affordability coexist? That's a very thought-provoking question. I believe it can be done, and I am sure by you being here this afternoon, you've managed to have that question answered. There was the issue of the land as equity. And here, I think the key takeaway for all the sovereigns, especially governments, and I hope with our financial partners, is that you can help the sovereigns to structure such that land becomes part of their equity into the financing instruments. If you can help the sovereign so that they can be able to get that social dividend that comes in with providing the land. So the land is not being yes, it is being provided at no cost, but we all know that land has a cost, has a value. It is very important if you can be able to help us, especially in the African continent, to be able to capitalize and get this equity dividend. There was an issue of coming up with innovative ways of urban development fund, which can take a small percentage of the wealth that is being generated within the urban areas, and it can go back to providing some of the infrastructure that we need. There was the point of leveraging the large economies of scale and the long supply chain that is associated with this particular sector. From Audrey, main obstacles being lack of coordination of stakeholders, different interests, different roles, and then the issue of the maturity of developers, some of them too small to provide housing at scale, so we need to develop them. Other, from Abdullah, is the role of government, solidarity and inclusivity, political will, define the role of government, PPPs, de-risking and defining what affordability is. And Kings picked up from there, and he actually said that Shelter Africa, you have defined what affordability is per country, because they vary from one country to the other. You've spoken about coming up with project implementation fund or support fund that can help in developing the projects to bankability, because we have a lot of projects but not all of them are bankable. I think that was very important. And of course you introduced the issue of leveraging technology. Femi talks about form follows function. Question is, what are we solving for? If we can be able to answer the question what we are solving for, we might realize we're not having to solve for 100%, but only for a small percentage. And the question of formal rental housing was introduced, and I think that is was a very important issue that was brought about. From the floor, we heard about the urban renewal from the professor from Lagos University versus Greenfield. Again, very thought-provoking remark that was made by our professor. But it's not a question of one versus the other. We have got to do all these things together. We know that urban renewal, one of the biggest challenges is tenure regularization. It's very difficult to implement urban renewal without tenure regularization. The minister from St. Lucia spoke about affordability does not exist in a vacuum, and dealt with the issue of the vast inequality that needs to be addressed. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've had a very, very rich conversation. I believe that you have all had something to take home with. This conversation continues, and as the Vice President of the EIB spoke about, we need to reimagine in this hall here. That's where the hopes and aspirations of all the generations that are to come lies. What kind of urban areas are we going to equip our generation and the next generation? God bless you. My name is Charles Hingap, Principal Secretary, State Department for Housing. It's been a great pleasure moderating this session. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return the headphones to recharge the batteries.